There comes a moment in every empath's life that no one else sees. It doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There's no shouting, no slammed doors, no public declaration. It's quiet, internal, almost invisible. But inside, something irreversible happens. The breaking point is not built in a day, it is built in years. Years of being the strong one. Years of understanding everyone else's pain while no one truly understands yours. Years of saying, it's okay, when it wasn't. Years of forgiving what should have never been repeated. An empath doesn't stop caring because they are heartless. They stop caring because their heart has been stretched beyond its natural limits. They were the safe place, the therapist friend, the emotional shock absorber in every room. They sensed tension before it was spoken. They carried moods that were never theirs. They gave people the benefit of the doubt again and again, believing love would fix what effort refused to change. But here's what no one talks about. Constant compassion without reciprocity becomes self-abandonment. Every time the empath chose someone else's comfort over their own truth, a small fracture formed. Every time they ignored a red flag because they understood the trauma behind it, a boundary dissolved. And slowly, exhaustion replaced empathy. The breaking point is not rage, it is clarity. It is the moment the empath realizes that caring has become costly, that loyalty has turned into self-betrayal, that understanding someone's wounds does not excuse how they wound you. Something shifts. The emotional overextension tightens back inward. The constant checking in stops. The long explanations shorten. The effort becomes measured. And the most powerful part, they don't announce it. They simply change. The energy that once chased resolution becomes still. The empathy that once overreached becomes reserved. When an empath finally reaches this point, it is not a loss of love. It is the awakening of self-respect. And once that clarity arrives, there is no going back to who they were before. When an empath has been hurt enough times, something inside them naturally begins to shift. They do not wake up one day and decide to detach. It happens gradually as a response to repeated emotional exhaustion. At first, they still react, they still care deeply. They still try to fix misunderstandings and restore connection. But over time, they notice that their efforts rarely change anything, so they start protecting themselves. Emotional detachment becomes a shield, not because they no longer feel, but because feeling everything so intensely without protection became overwhelming. They realized that absorbing other people's emotions, excuses, and unresolved issues was slowly draining their own sense of stability. Detachment for an empath is not coldness. It is awareness. It is the moment they understand that they cannot control how others behave, no matter how much empathy they offer. They stop taking responsibility for reactions that are not theirs. They stop personalizing silence. They stop assuming blame for conflicts that stem from someone else's insecurity or immaturity. This shift feels uncomfortable at first, because detachment can feel like betrayal to the version of them that used to overextend. They might worry that pulling back means losing connection. They might fear that setting emotional distance will make them appear indifferent. But in reality, detachment creates space for clarity. When they stop reacting immediately to every emotional trigger, they observe instead. They watch patterns. They notice consistency or the lack of it. They allow people to reveal who they truly are through action rather than words. And something powerful happens. Without constant emotional rescue from the empath, relationships begin to show their true foundation. Those who value the empath for emotional support may resist a change. Those who genuinely respect them adapt and step up. Detachment also brings peace. The constant need to explain, defend, or manage other people's feelings fades. The nervous system that once stayed on high alert begins to relax. The empath learns that they do not have to carry every emotional burden to feel worthy of connection. They can care from a distance. They can love without absorbing. And in that balance, they reclaim control over their emotional energy, choosing when to engage and when to step back without guilt. For years, you may have believed that giving more would eventually bring balance. You poured effort into relationships. You offered understanding when others made mistakes. You stayed longer than you should have. You tolerated behavior that quietly crossed your boundaries because you believed loyalty required endurance. But over time, something became clear. Your generosity was often assumed, not appreciated. The moment an empath stops over giving is not dramatic. It begins with small internal shifts. You notice when your energy is being taken for granted. You see patterns where effort flows in one direction. You realize that you're constantly emotionally while receiving minimal reciprocity. And instead of reacting with anger, you start responding with restraint. You stop jumping in to solve problems that others are capable of handling. You stop offering immediate reassurance when someone's inconsistency creates discomfort. You stop filling emotional gaps that another person leaves intentionally or unintentionally. This is not because you no longer care. It is because you understand that overgiving created imbalance. When you continuously give without limits, people unconsciously adjust to that level of access. They expect availability. They expect understanding without accountability. They expect forgiveness without change. And the more you supply, the more the expectation grows. So when you finally withdraw that endless supply, the dynamic shifts. Some people may react with confusion or resistance. They might ask why you changed. They might interpret your boundary as distance. But what they are really experiencing is the loss of unlimited access to your energy. And that discomfort reveals truth. The empath who stops over giving begins to observe who steps forward to meet them halfway, who respects their boundaries without negotiation, who shows consistency when effort is no longer automatic. You start investing selectively. Your time becomes intentional. Your emotional support becomes conditional on mutual respect. Your compassion remains, but it is no longer freely distributed to environments that deplete you. Over time, this transformation feels empowering. You no longer measure your worth by how much you give. You measure it by how well your energy is protected. You realize that healthy relationships do not require self-sacrifice to survive. And when you stop over-giving, you create space for reciprocity or for release. Either way, you win your peace back. For a long time, boundaries may have felt uncomfortable to you. Not because you didn't understand them, but because enforcing them meant risking disapproval. As an empath, you were often conditioned to prioritize harmony over honesty. You learned that saying yes kept things smooth, while saying no created tension. So you chose silence over confrontation. But something changes after repeated experiences of being misunderstood or taken for granted. You begin to realize that tolerance without limits slowly turns into self-neglect. You see how people respond when you allow access without restriction. You notice how quickly respect fades when boundaries are weak. That awareness becomes a turning point. Boundaries start to feel less like rejection and more like protection. You understand that protecting your time, your emotions, and your energy is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-preservation. You can still care deeply while refusing to accept behavior that hurts you. The difference is clarity. When you express a boundary now, you do it with calm confidence. You don't over-explain. You don't apologize for having standards. You don't negotiate your peace just to keep someone comfortable. And even if others react with resistance, you no longer interpret that reaction as proof that you were wrong. You recognize it as adjustment. People who benefited from undefined boundaries may push back. They might call you different. They might say you changed. But in reality, you simply stopped allowing imbalance. You stopped overextending to maintain relationships that required your sacrifice. And that shift feels powerful. Strong boundaries also reduce emotional confusion. You no longer spend endless time analyzing mixed signals or accepting inconsistent behavior. If someone respects your limits, connection deepens naturally. If someone repeatedly ignores them, distance becomes the consequence, not punishment, but clarity. Over time, enforcing boundaries strengthens your sense of identity. You begin to trust your instincts more. You feel safer expressing discomfort early instead of suppressing it. You learn that relationships built on mutual respect require both people to honor limits. For the empath who once feared being seen as difficult, boundaries become liberating. They allow you to remain compassionate without being consumed. And in that balance, you protect not only your relationships, but your own emotional well-being. There comes a moment when you realize that not every relationship in your life was built on mutual depth. Some connections existed because you were consistently available, because you responded quickly, because you absorbed emotional tension without demanding accountability. Your presence made things easier for others, and over time, that became the foundation of the connection. But when you start pulling back, everything becomes clearer. As an empath who has stopped over-functioning, you begin to see who stays engaged when your effort decreases. The shift is subtle at first. You might stop initiating conversations as frequently. You might stop offering emotional rescue automatically. You might allow space instead of filling silence, and people respond to that space. Some relationships adapt. They become more balanced because both sides start contributing. Those connections feel healthier, more reciprocal, and more secure. You no longer carry the emotional weight alone. You see genuine effort returning to you. But not every relationship survives that change. There are people who are comfortable with your unlimited support. They were used to your understanding, your patience, your forgiveness. When you stop over-giving, they may react with confusion or even frustration. They might interpret your withdrawal as distance or selfishness. In reality, what they are experiencing is the loss of access to something they relied on. This moment reveals truth without confrontation. The empath who stops carrying in the old way doesn't chase explanations. They observe patterns. If someone only reaches out when they need something, that pattern becomes obvious. If communication disappears when support is no longer automatic, the imbalance is exposed. And instead of forcing connection, you allow relationships to self-select. This process can feel painful because it means accepting that some people were connected to your availability, not your authenticity. But it is also freeing. You stop investing energy into dynamics that require you to overextend just to feel valued. The relationships that remain after you stop overgiving are the ones rooted in respect and reciprocity. You begin to understand that quality matters more than quantity. A smaller circle that honors your boundaries feels safer than a large circle that drains you. And through this shift, you no longer fear losing people because you are finally keeping those who choose you without conditions. The most powerful shift happens when you stop measuring your worth by how much you tolerate and start measuring it by how much respect you receive. For years, you may have stayed in situations that required patience beyond your limits. You forgave quickly. You explained yourself repeatedly. You adjusted your behavior to preserve connection. And you told yourself that doing so was a sign of maturity. But eventually you reach a point where endurance no longer feels like growth, it feels like repetition. When an empath stops caring in the old way, they are not becoming indifferent. They are becoming discerning. The difference is profound. Indifference shuts the door completely. Discernment keeps the door open, but only for those who approach with integrity and consistency. You begin to see people for who they show themselves to be, not for who you hope they could become. You release the habit of building emotional expectations around potential. You stop investing energy into promises that are not backed by action. And that clarity removes a lot of emotional confusion. This transformation also changes how you respond to disappointment. In the past, you might have tried to repair everything. You might have initiated difficult conversations over and over, hoping for understanding. You might have given second chances generously, believing that effort would eventually be matched. But now, instead of chasing resolution, you observe behavior. If someone shows accountability, growth becomes possible. If someone repeats the same patterns without change, you adjust your proximity. This shift feels empowering because it restores control over your energy. You no longer feel responsible for fixing dynamics that another person refuses to improve. You understand that relationships require mutual participation. Without it, they cannot thrive, and something surprising happens when you reach this stage. Peace becomes your priority. You are no longer impressed by intensity or emotional drama. You value stability. You choose calm over chaos. You prefer authenticity over performance. Your standards rise not from ego but from self-respect. When you stop caring in the sense of over-functioning and over-investing, you actually start caring more deeply about yourself. You protect your time. You protect your energy. You protect your emotional space. And in doing so, you step fully into a version of yourself that is no longer available for imbalance, only for meaningful connection.